Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be splitting up between showcasing both the fit and also a potential change to this weapon system. So what I've been doing is I've been tinkering with dual 150 millimeter railguns, which are largely unused, and I wanted to test them out to see if I could actually find like a decent use for them and kind of what they excel at and potentially what maybe could change on them in the future. So this video is going to kind of showcase the fit that I'm using, some fights that I've gotten in it, and then at the end of the video it's going to be going over some potential changes to dual 150 railguns that I think would help put them in a better position as far as possibly using them as like an anti-tackle platform or an anti-tackle weapon system. I think they'll still benefit mainly by ships that have range bonuses, but still that could open them up a little bit more for other things and maybe give us a new anti-tackle platform instead of always having to rely on like rapid heavy or rapid light missiles and heavy pulse lasers and things like that. Now for this fit, this eagle fit here, this is a well, to be honest, this is a bad fit. The eagle is not that great, but in this particular instance, it's the best ship for what I'm trying to do. So with the dual 150s, the idea behind this is that I wanted to see how well they would actually be at tracking frigates and shooting at range. And for the eagle, it has a double range bonus, so this actually works fairly well to at least complement the base low range of the dual 150s. And for anyone that's not familiar, the dual 150s have the same range as the frigate 150 millimeter railgun. So that you're not really gaining any range advantages with the dual 150s as you are compared to the standard frigate 150 millimeter railgun. And their tracking isn't really that great either, all things considered. Their base tracking is about 15 points, if I recall correctly. And and if you want to have a comparison, like the frigate version is like 90 points of tracking, so it's a significant difference between the frigate version and the cruiser version. But again, I wanted to actually test out to see how well this particular fit would apply to frigates. And it originally started as kind of like a kiting fit, and then I changed my mind because the eagle is just so slow, like, and everything's going to catch you. So there's no point in trying to run away. So I set it up more for inevitably I'm going to get tackled, so I'm going to brawl with it. So this puts it in kind of a hybrid position where it can both brawl and kite, and still project damage to a decent range. Like if you're using spike on this fit, it will project to 80 kilometers. There is no assault damage control on it because you don't have the CPU for it. I wanted to go max damage on the fit just because the dual 150s are actually pretty bad for raw damage. Let me actually put in the standard damage ammo here. So with antimatter before drones, we're looking at 393 DPS. If you have perfect skills, like if you have railgun specialization to 5, you'll do 400 DPS. So at the best, you're doing 400 DPS with dual 150s before you use drugs or implants or anything like that. And then if you include the drones, you're doing 472 DPS, so almost 500 or over 500 if you go ahead and heat the guns. Now with antimatter, you have about an optimal 20 kilometers, which isn't too bad. It can project out to most tackle ranges, but generally if you're getting tackled by like an interceptor or something like that, you're going to want to go to plutonium because that gives you a 25 kilometer optimal, or I also use thorium because that gets you out to 35. So that way you're not having to constantly switch between ammo types. 35 kilometers kind of covers pretty much the full distance on if something small has you tackled. Now, if there's something further away from you, then I generally will use iridium because that gets you out to 49 kilometer optimal range. And as you can see, without drones, our DPS is pretty lethargic when you're using longer range ammo. We're only looking at 230 DPS roughly. But again, this fit is meant to counter frigates. So 230 DPS at 50 kilometers is still going to hurt a lot to a frigate. And then you can use spike And spike I primarily just use for when I'm needing to shoot a frigate or something that as it's burning in, starting at like 100 kilometers. And the dual 150s can still project out to about 73 kilometers with spike or 80 kilometers with fall off. And again, our DPS isn't great. You're looking at about 230 DPS. So again, the point of this fit is to kind of act as bait, because you set up the fight at 70, 100 kilometers. They burn in on you thinking that you're rail fit. They start seeing that they're getting hit by rail guns at 80 kilometers and like, oh, he's rail fit. I can just kind of get close to him and get under his guns, and then he can't hit me. But that's kind of why I have a scram, double web, and afterburner on this, is that they're going to think that they have the advantage. They're going to get on top of me. They're going to tackle me, and then I have full range control. The rigs I have is just a tracking rig to bump up the base tracking a little bit. And when I'm brawling, I'm either using antimatter, or if it's something that's a little bit more nimble or maybe has an afterburner, or just I want to make sure that I'm getting full damage, then I can use javelin. So with the tracking rig and javelin, we get a turret tracking bonus of about 22.5 points, and then I also will have drop booster, which I'll use on occasion depending on the situation, which takes the tracking up to around 25 points. So it's not terrible. I guess if you wanted a reference, like medium blaster tracking is about 40 points. So it's not as good as blasters, but when something's double webbed and you have full range control with the afterburner, then you can make it work. Just a simple EM rig for the other rig, just to try and cover the EM hole a little bit, and then your tank is primarily just a single XL ASB, because again, this is meant to pretty much deal with frigates for the most part. I don't think there's probably a couple cruisers you could manage, but you're not really that tanky. CPU is really tight, so that's why the webs are compact, and the scram is a compact as well, or scoped one. The scram can actually kind of get you in trouble. I don't really like it, just because its range messes you up when you're trying to set your ranges properly. I have actually changed this over to an abyssal scram. Again, it's still a faint scoped scram. I just rolled with a decayed mod to get like 400 more meters out of it, which is close enough to a standard T2, and it gave me a little bit extra CPU. So it's really cheap to roll these. I think I only had to spend like 300,000 ISK or something to get a rolled decayed scram, at least one that worked, so not a big deal. So yeah, that's pretty much it for the fitting. And we'll get into the fights here so you can kind of see how it performs. So this first fight is really simple. It's a slasher coming in and burning in. So in this point, I'm using Spike in the initial few volleys, and he starts to burn a little bit perpendicular and is also getting closer. So at this point, I switch to thorium so I can get more tracking and more damage. And as you can see, I kill him before he's even really able to react. In this fight, I was roaming around in R10 and ran across Horde, which they brought in a Garmer, and this Garmer actually is a double damp Garmer, but because the Eagle has such ridiculous base lock range, the double damps doesn't really do a whole lot. But as he was burning in, I was using Spike, and then he damps me here, but I can just burn right back into him because I think I have like a 47 kilometer range even under double damps, so I'm able to relock him again, get my drones on him. And my only mistake was I used antimatter because I thought I'd be a little bit closer, and I couldn't apply. If I'd switched to thorium, I think I actually probably would have killed him here because he had no tank. But my main goal here was to kill the Dramule burning in. So the Garmer warped off, was able to force him off, so that was fine. And then I tackled the Dramule. For some reason, the Dramule doesn't tackle me back or anything like that. And then I'm able to control him with the double webs, the scram, and the afterburner, and then he pretty much dies. And everyone else that they have was far off the ESS, so they couldn't come in and assist right away. The Cerberus got a little bit close. He started throwing some volleys at me right at the end, but I was able to warp off after killing the Dramule. And because everything's burning in on me now, I go ahead and just pop the wreck, but there wasn't really anything of value in the wreck anyway. In this fight, I actually had just left the system and there's a saber sitting here, so I burned off gate. And if you notice, there's a Nurgle sitting at range at about 200 kilometers, so I was really interested in getting this Nurgle to fight, but I went ahead and shot the saber a little bit just so maybe they would realize I was rail fit. And the saber jumps out, so I go ahead and warp to the ESS here to see if the Nurgle will end up following me. The Nurgle, so I warped at 100. The Nurgle landed at 0, so it wasn't really a great scenario, and I didn't want to burn in on him and shoot because made it look too eager. So what I ended up doing is warping back to the bubble, or warping back to this gate, and at that time the bubble actually despawned by the time he followed me. And so as you see here, both me and the Nurgle land in technically the bubble that no longer exists. So we're both on top of each other, at which point he scrams me, and I'm able to scram him back and get double webs and, start using the afterburner to pull range and get transversal. So, even though I'm not doing a ton of damage, 400 DPS is still plenty to smack down most frigates. In this case, I'm using Javelin for the extra tracking, and he goes down pretty quickly there because he didn't have afterburn or anything like that. He was only MWD fit. This fight was a little amusing just because I was being chased around by Vargur, Loki, and a bunch of other stuff as I ended up getting trapped in a pocket. And I had this Vengeance following me, and I actually did like a little loop in the pocket so that just the tackle would follow me. And then I purposely warped to a Celestial to where he would land near me. And so I let him tackle me, and this is actually a dual rep Vengeance. It's basically all tank. But, again, kind of going back to what I said earlier, you have 400 DPS, you're going to be able to kill most frigates. You can see here the Loki warps in, but I think he just warped to the Celestial that, was mentioned on comms rather than directly to the guy. So I kill the Vengeance here, and right as I kill the Vengeance, you can see that the Vargur I mentioned earlier warps right in. So, I make sure he sees me, and then I warp off. So this fight ended up where I think this group actually filamented in, so I was just kind of hanging around and suddenly local spike with like 4 or 5 guys, and this group ended up fighting the locals, and they got killed by a couple Praxises, I think. And I noticed the Lachesis warped off to the ESS after some of the other people in their gang died. So I went ahead and warped the ESS at 100, thinking that maybe he'll be at 100. So I landed on top of him. I was able to kill him just because even with the lethargic DPS, it was still enough to kill the Lachesis since he's already a little bit weak from the Praxis. And then the Malediction and Kikamura warp in, and this fight, I don't kill anything else here, but I do like this fight because it does kind of showcase the flexibility of the hull. I don't get a bunch of hits on the Interceptor initially, but at this point I don't really care about the Interceptor. I actually want to go after the Kikimora. And so I switched to Iridium because I'm kind of burning in after him, so I want to be able to start applying as soon as possible. And I shoot a little early here. I don't think I'm in optimal now. Start applying now, and I'm starting to get some decent hits on him. And this is an armor Kiki, so that's why the shield went down so fast. And I do end up messing up a little bit here because I ended up I ended up changing ammo types to antimatter when I should have just stuck with Iridium and kept heating. And so that he was able to warp off. And then we're back to the Interceptor here, and again, the drones are kind of slowly whittling him down, and I'm trying to see if I can get some hits on him. Right now, though, he's pretty much able to dodge most of everything. I swap to or taking my drop booster to see if I can get that to get me some hits, but at that point, he actually starts just burning away completely. I do think I got like one hit there as he burned away, but now he's out of my range, and it doesn't really matter anymore, and I'm not tackled, so I just pretty much go ahead and warp off at this point, and so at least I got the Lachesis. In this fight, I was actually kind of hanging out in this other system, bothering a bunch of miners, and they weren't really doing anything. And so, like 5 or 10 minutes later, I went ahead and left, and this hawk ended up jumping out right as I was jumping in. So I warped, or I burned back to the gate to jump through, and the hawk was there. So I went ahead and burned off the gate while shooting him with the railgun to kind of bait him to burn in. He tackles, and then I tackle back. And this is actually a dual medium ancillary booster hawk, but I think he was too busy typing in local to actually boost his tank, because he almost dies here in the beginning before actually doing anything. As you can see, he types in local for help, but he's not getting help because local is just full of a bunch of miners. So now he starts actually active boosting, and the hawk has actually really good resistances against hybrids. So even though I'm doing 400 DPS, it's probably significantly lower than that because of the high resistances to thermal and kinetic. You can tell he's actually tanking me, but he's also burning through his boosters quite quickly. And I'm also monitoring my drones to make sure that my drones aren't being shot instead. And now it looks like he's finally out of boosters, and then he pretty much dies at this point. So yeah, once you get a frigate isolated, it's not too hard to slowly whittle them down. In this fight, I run across a Hecate that was combat probing, so I ended up actually just kind of warping to a point where he would immediately combat probe me, and he ended up warping on top of me. So I actually was able to escape his initial combat probe and just burned off a little bit, at which point I burned back a little bit so he would actually tackle me. And then I do the normal thing with the dual web scram afterburner and just get outside of his range, so he's not really doing as much damage as he could. Granted, the Eagle has really good resistances against hybrid as well, so I'm not going to take the full damage from the Hecate either, but better to not take full damage if you can help it. So yeah, he goes down pretty quick, and that's just another kill for the Eagle here. So now that we've gone through all the fights that I've had with this, or at least most of the fights I've had with it, this is I'm going to kind of talk about the dual 150s themselves and potential changes we could see to them or make to them to make them a little bit more, or just make them better. Or my idea for them is that they should be more of like an anti-tackle platform, something that you would be using on a cruiser to target primarily frigates and destroyers, but they would be relatively weak against other cruisers, which is pretty close to how they are now, but they need a little bit of some tweaks to kind of help them out here. So as I have the comparison tool up right now, and I have all the main stats up here, like range and things like that. Range, activation cost, rate of fire, damage modifiers, etc. So dual 150s and the standard 150 millimeter railgun, or the frigate version, they both have identical ranges. So they both have the same optimal, they both have the same fall off. They are essentially the same gun, just the cruiser version is the quote unquote double or dual version. Um, again, this is reasonable because it's based off the standard 150, but kind of in my opinion, because it's a cruiser weapon system, it's on a completely different platform or turret arrangement than like the frigate version. So you would think with that difference, there'd be like a more robust tracking system. So maybe there should be a relatively small increase to the range differences between the standard and the dual. This is to make it more so that like the Eagle works in this scenario because the Eagle's bonuses are so overtuned. You have a double optimal bonus, you have a large targeting range, so even you can make the relatively low optimal of the dual 150s workable. But on other hulls, it's not really that in that case. Like if you try to use dual 150s on like a MOA or anything like that, anything that doesn't have a big range bonus on it, they're not going to be very useful. So the first change would be just a very mild buff, like a 10 to 15% increase to optimal range on the railgun. Now, this isn't a huge change, it's only like actually a few kilometers, but it scales more with the higher range ammo that you're using. Alternatively, you could also change it to where they just have maybe a bigger fall off bonus. So whereas the 200 millimeter railguns or 200 millimeter and 250 millimeter railguns have higher optimal, the dual 150s have a lot more fall off. So that just kind of separates them a little bit between the other railgun options. The biggest thing, in my opinion, that needs to change is their tracking. So as you can see here, and this is all base, what's in the comparison tool. So this isn't after level 5 skills. So you can see the frigate version has 73 points of tracking. The dual 150s have 12 points. And then again, with level 5 skills, like I mentioned earlier, you will be going to about 15 points of tracking on the dual 150s, and then the standard 150 will go up to like 93 points. So it's pretty significant. Obviously, I'm not saying we need to buff these back up to frigate level, but again, if we want them to be a better anti-frigate platform, especially for the sacrifice you're making to fit them, because you are losing quite a bit of range on most other hulls other than the Eagle itself, then I think they should have a much better tracking bonus so that they can actually do that job a little bit better. And we already kind of have a template for this with the quad light beams, which were relatively recently rebalanced. It's probably like 5 or 6 years by now, but in Eve, that is relatively recently because of how slow CCP works at things. But quad light beams actually have almost 30 tracking, so that is the medium cruiser alternative for the the light beam system. That's basically the frigate version, but it's 4 of them on a single turret. So they actually have quite good tracking, whereas these are 15 tracking. So I'd actually like to see the tracking bumped up to at least 25 points. I think that would give them a lot more flexibility. They'd be able to track a lot better, and then that would scale a lot better when you do add tracking mods. So like if you add a metastasis rig, tracking computer, tracking enhancers, things like that, they would actually track relatively well. And you'd get kind of more bang for the buck starting at a higher base value. And then the last thing that I'll touch on is the damage. The damage is somewhat low, but I also feel like that is balanced because of the flexibility of the guns between all the ammo choices you have. And then if they do have decent tracking, you also have that going for them. And they have higher potential ranges than things like Scorch on like heavy pulse lasers. So heavy pulse lasers on an unbonused hull go to about 22 or 23 kilometers, whereas the dual 150s with Spike shoot out to about 35 kilometers on like an unbonused hull. So the range comparison is more in the favor of railguns. So I don't really think they need a huge DPS increase or any DPS increase, because the other issue is if you increase the DPS, then they start to do better damage than the longer range versions, which some might argue that's fine because the longer range versions obviously have more range. So it's just something to consider. But I think if they were to get a damage buff starting with 10% would be fine. That put them about the same damage as the 200 millimeter rails, and then we can kind of see how it goes from there. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. What I'd like to see changed. Otherwise, I think they're relatively well balanced. The fitting on them is good. Barely uses any fitting, to be honest. It's just the Eagles, with my particular fit, because I'm using an XL ASB, it uses up a lot of the fitting that you would otherwise have for other options by using the dual 150s. But, I think this has a lot of potential as a good anti-tackle platform, and it would be nice for us to have a more diverse option list of anti-tackle weapons, because right now the meta primarily focuses around rapid light missiles and, maybe heavy pulse. But, we still have lots of other things where it's like, people are now transitioning to like heavy beams or artillery because they're still getting enough tracking to kill things. So it's, again, just having more options would be nice and help kind of mix up the meta a little bit. And that's it for this video. Hope you guys like the slight change in the format. Trying to also keep it kind of shorter than my other videos, but again, thanks for watching and see you in the next one.